this strikes me as, I'm sorry, I'm sure it's going to sound rude, but it strikes me as an outrageous thing to suggest it doesn't really matter. Surely it matters to the torture victims whether they're being tortured. It doesn't require that this makes some cosmic difference to the eternal significance of the universe for it to matter whether a human being is tortured.
What if we found out that there was actually the cosmic, we go, oh, so big. It reminds me of that scene off of Men in Black where the little marbles are flicked by the alien and one marble is our universe, but there's so many marbles and they're in this little bag pouch with all these other marbles that are just our universe, the expanding universe. So you kind of have this multiverse thing, but outside of that is this giant alien flicking our universe in another universe like marbles, playing marbles. Like what if there's something beyond that, that's beyond that, that's beyond that, that's beyond that, that's beyond that? Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are back at this debate. Is God necessary for morality? William Lane Craig versus Shelly Kagan at Columbia University. And Craig just did his final, or his opening, 20-minute opening. We listened to their opening, so if you're tuning into this one, you're missing the first half of the debate, so go back and watch that before we get here. Craig just ended on a note. There are 3 requirements. He lists those 3 requirements, and he says you have to have a God in order to explain these things. And he makes it sound like without it, there is absolutely no reason to be moral, to have a moral code, and to think that something is objectively wrong, because then anything can go. And so we're about to get into the weeds here. I knew we needed to do a round 2 instead of making it a super long video. Let's see how this debate goes from here. I was told that Craig lost this debate likely, or this one, he was very, it looked bad for him, is what I was told.
We'll now have 10 minutes of questioning between Dr. Craig asking Dr. Kagan about his thoughts.
Slowing it to normal.
Well, obviously, a number of questions came up in my talk that would be pertinent to what you shared, Shelly. In your opening address, you said right or wrong depends upon the whether you hurt other people without justification. And when asked, are these really wrong? You answered yes. Why? Because it harms the victim. Now, I guess my difficulty is that I certainly agree that it's wrong to harm people, obviously, but it's hard for me to understand on a naturalistic worldview, such as I described, why on the worldview of naturalism, inflicting harm upon other members of our species is really wrong. It seems to me that this happens all the time among other animals, and so why is it wrong peculiarly for human beings to inflict harm on each other?
All right, so let's start with that. Suppose that my 3-year-old nephew walks into your house, takes some book off your shelf, and tears the pages out. He hasn't done anything wrong, or 3-year-old's probably old enough, he has done something wrong. Make him a year and a half, he hasn't done anything wrong. If I go into your house, tear some pages out of your book, I've done something wrong. What's the difference? Well, I'm capable of appreciating reasons for respecting your property that my 1.5-year-old, this is hypothetical 1.5-year-old nephew, doesn't have the capacity, right? There are differences between people that allow me and you to think about our behaviors, to evaluate our behaviors, to see whether or not there are legitimate reasons for behaving as we do. Creatures that don't have that capacity don't have that capacity. It's precisely because they lack that capacity that makes no sense that the notion of right and wrong behavior gets no purchase. Lions can't reflect upon their behavior, so when they do it, it's not wrong. Mm-hmm. If you or I were to engage in that behavior, we can reflect upon that. We can recognize the reasons for not behaving that way. So I think the distinction is a fairly straightforward one, not a deep mystery or a hard challenge for the naturalist to respond to.
Real quick, before Craig continues, it also becomes difficult that in evolution, right? Craig has the one claiming God's behind it all or created it, and he's a creator. that God would create the diet of a lion to be other animals. And this is a very messed up world that we already live in. And so there's all of this. If you have a creator, now you have to bring this. Why isn't the fault being laid upon the engineer of this world? Like Marcion would have probably said, you have a clumsy demiurge.
Okay, I think that's a good answer for why we wouldn't regard animals as moral agents who would be culpable for their acts. But it seems to me that at best that answer would go to show that rationality, or the ability to reflect rationally on things, is a necessary condition for moral behavior. But I don't see that that's a sufficient condition for moral behavior. It's still not clear to me why it would be wrong for creatures who have considerably complex neurological systems to inflict harm on each other on a naturalistic worldview in the struggle for survival.
Okay, so the question you asked initially was, how can I explain why it's wrong for me to murder when it's not wrong for lions to murder? And to answer that question, all it takes is for me to point out a relevant difference between us. And you've just, I think, said, yeah, all right, so I managed to do that. If we now shift to the question, so what does it take for wrongness to enter the world above and beyond rationality? I think the answer might well be, actually, once we achieve a certain level of rationality, nothing more is taken. Nothing more is needed. The reason it's objectively wrong for me to engage in murder is precisely because there is a reason for me not to do it, a reason that I'm capable of recognizing. And if you ask, well, what more does it take? The answer is, well, those are the basic ingredients right there. We can refine it. I mean, we can put a little icing on it if we'd like to make it. But in terms of the essentials, that's it.
Imagine you're an ancient Jew who got a law from God, but there is no punishment for this. There is no ultimate reward in the afterlife for this. They just looked at it as a blessing in this life or a curse in this life. So later developments of a post-mortem, experience of heaven and hell, this kind of stuff develops. But, this guy's kind of saying, look, just look at the now, the here, and based on the rationality that I have, I'm able to reason and say, hey, hold on. That's enough for me to know that I don't want to do that.
What there's reason for me to do depends on what kind of creature I am. Once I become the kind of creature in the evolutionary, process, once creatures evolve that are capable of stepping back from their actions, capable of reflecting about whether or not their behavior makes sense, whether it conforms to standards that they are themselves prepared to endorse, at that point, the machinery is in place. And at that point, there are reasons for me to behave in certain ways and to avoid other kinds of behavior. And if you ask, but what makes that wrong?
I'm still not clear as to why these beings suddenly achieve intrinsic moral worth in virtue of having these complex nervous systems that enables them to have self-reflection and so forth.
If you put it as complex nervous systems, it sounds pretty deflationary.
Right.
What's so special about having a complex nervous system? But of course, that complex nervous system allows you to do calculus. It allows you to do astrophysics. It allows you to write poetry. It allows you to fall in love. Put under that description, you ask, what's so special about humans from a naturalist perspective? I'm at a loss to know how to answer that question. If you don't see why we'd be special and different from everything else in creation, that because we can do poetry, we can write a novel, we can think philosophical thoughts, we can do calculus, and we can think about the morality of our behavior, I don't know what kind of answer could possibly satisfy you at that point.
Well, obviously.
Damn, that is a really, really good response. Because Craig needs the extra, right? He needs the metaphysical. He needs divinity to be the key.
Obviously, the kind of answer that I offered, but
but can I ask just to follow up on that? Because I'm tempted to say I could play this game, and that's unfair because, of course, it's not a game. But I could pose the same kinds of questions to you. Perhaps I will. In 10 minutes, I could say, look, all right. So God says, you guys are really, really special.
Right.
How does his saying it make us really special? But you see, he gave us a soul. How does our having a soul make us special? Whatever answer you give, you could always say, with regard to that, what's so special about that? At a certain point, you're just going to have to say, you know what? These features really do seem to me to be special. Insofar as it seems to me that our ability to communicate, to reflect, to love, to be creative, and consequently to shape our behavior with an eye towards how we're interacting with one another, these things strike me as remarkable ways in which we're special.
I think that they strike all of us that way, and that's the difficulty, perhaps, I think, in showing what I'm attempting to show, is that we all do, I think, intuitively value one another. We value persons. We value poetry, creativity, and all of these things. I think we all agree that these are goods. The question is, though, on a naturalistic view, why think that these things are goods? It seems to me that you emphasize in your own book, On the Limits of Morality, the importance of having explanations and not cutting off the search for explanations too soon. And I wonder if you're not cutting off the search for explanations too soon by simply saying, well, I'm just going to regard persons as intrinsically valuable, but without any kind of further grounding for that.
Well, of course, I haven't claimed there is no further grounding for that. I gave you a sketch of the contractarian thought. Your attitude was, I don't find that a very compelling story. It doesn't seem to me to be the kind of thing that constitutes an adequate grounding. Yeah. I suppose these things are in the eyes of the beholder, and everybody here is entitled to decide for themselves what kind of answers will be satisfactory or not.
Let me ask you a different question.
One more.
Oh, okay. Are you a determinist?
Yes.
And yet you still think that love is significant and human choices are morally significant, even though they're determined? So
to give a piece of jargon to the audience that Bill will be familiar with, I'm a compatibilist. That is to say, I believe that one can combine determinism and free will. So absent free will, humans would lack the significance that we clearly have. But I believe that's compatible with determinism. Actually, am I a determinist? Who knows what quantum mechanics teaches us about whether or not determinism is true. But at least I believe that determinism could be true without in any way threatening my conviction that humans are special.
Did you have a follow-up?
By the way, I think that Craig is a compatibilist in theological sense. From what I understand, he likes to combine the predestination and the free will in some way.
Follow up on that one?
Well,
I think you did.
Only to say that it just seems to me to rob moral choices of any sort of significance if we're determined to do it by the antecedent physical causes that lead up to the point of choosing, and then cause our brains to react one way rather than another. I can't see how that could have any more moral significance than a tree growing a branch at a certain point in its development.
Because you're an incompatibilist. You don't believe determinism and free will. So this is a debate for another night. I mean, it's not that I think the truth of compatibilism is at all self-evident.
Can you just explain what that term means?
Compatibilism is the view that there's no logical inconsistency between belief in determinism on the one hand and the existence of free will on the other. They're compatible. Well,
that's a little bit misleading, though. I mean, you need to explain what you mean by free will in that case, if everything's determined.
What I was trying to do is simply give a quick definition. I said that this is a very, as you know, it's a very, very complicated question. We would basically hijack the entire rest of the evening to start trying
I'm unclear on the terms myself.
Right. So my thought was just that the plausibility of the compatibilist view that I hold, I don't take to be self-evident. I believe it takes philosophical argumentation for it. I completely agree that those drawn to incompatibilism, those drawn to the view that you can't have both deterministic physical laws and robust free will think if naturalism is true and the best science teaches us that determinism is true, itself, a controversial question whether that's the best interpretation of our best science. then we'll lack free will. And then if free will is necessary for having special value, then we'll lack special value. But there's a lot of premises before we get to the conclusion that naturalism doesn't have space for this special value. And I reject several of those premises, which is why I'm not feeling uncomfortable by the challenge that Bill's raising.
Well, let's turn the table, and now you'll ask Bill some questions.
All right. So one of the things that you said in your opening remarks, well, you quoted several people. I think there was a long quote from Michael Roos saying something like, if naturalism is true, if theism is false, then ethics is illusory, deeper meaning is illusory. That's not an exact quote, but I think those phrases were there. And I found that an interesting slide, or so it seemed to me. The move from ethics is illusory to deeper meaning is illusory. I think I want to concede that in the way you mean deeper meaning, I don't believe in deeper meaning, because I think when you talk that way, you think for there to, not that I have any trouble talking about meaning or even deep meaning, but when you talk that way, I think you're thinking it's got to be meaning on a cosmic scale. That's where some of the points about accountability come in as well.
Yes.
So, fine, I believe that humans are just creatures that evolved on this tiny little speck of dust. But I don't see how the denial of deeper meaning should give me any reason to think, therefore I'm committed to ethics as illusory. So perhaps you could explain that.
Where that came in, I think, was with respect to moral accountability. And and also with regard to the significance of human beings. It seemed to me that on a naturalistic worldview, everything is ultimately destined to destruction in the heat death of the universe. As the universe expands, it grows colder and colder as its energy is used up. And eventually all the stars will burn out. All matter will collapse into dead stars and black holes. There will be no life, no heat, no light, only the corpses of dead stars and galaxies expanding into endless darkness. And in light of that end, it's hard for me to understand how our moral choices have any sort of significance. There's no moral accountability. The universe is neither better nor worse for what we do. That ultimately there isn't, our moral lives become vacuous because they don't have that kind of cosmic significance.
I still need to have you explain that for me better, because again, it seems to me it's one thing to say it lacks eternal, cosmic, everlasting significance. Mm-hmm. It's another thing to say it lacks significance. In fact, to give one of your examples, you talked about, again, I remember the source of this quote, but the torturers, was it Nazi torturers?
Right, yeah.
And you say, if theism isn't true, then it doesn't really matter. This strikes me as, I'm sorry, I'm sure it's going to sound rude, but it strikes me as an outrageous thing to suggest. It doesn't really matter? Surely it matters to the torture victims whether they're being tortured. It doesn't require that this makes some cosmic difference to the eternal significance of the universe for it to matter whether a human being is tortured.
What if we found out that there was actually the cosmic, we go, oh, so big. It reminds me of that scene off of Men in Black where the little marbles are flicked by the alien and one marble is our universe, but there's so many marbles and they're in this little bag pouch with all these other marbles that are just our universe, the expanding universe. So you kind of have this multiverse thing, but outside of that is this giant alien flicking our universe in another universe, like marbles, playing marbles. Like what if there's something beyond that, that's beyond that, that's beyond that, that's beyond that, that's beyond that? What if there's that, right? What if the morality stops somewhere and it doesn't go that far? Well, what if like an alien comes to Earth and goes, Craig, you're limiting where meaning stops at the universe. You don't realize God, in your definition, is this minuscule thing that only rules this one universe. You don't realize that God has a God that ultimately rules all the universes. And your morality is minimizing and mitigating the strength and power of really good morality. I mean, I could come up with a hypothetical, but I'm saying like Like, one is saying you don't need a cosmic morality to make sense of all this. The other one is saying it needs to entail everything for it to even have any meaning at all, any significant real meaning at all.
It matters to them. It matters to their family. It matters to us. So again, how do you move from the lack of eternal significance to the thought that if it doesn't have eternal significance, it can't have any significance?
Because the victim, it obviously matters to him in the sense that he's in pain and agony. But ultimately, it doesn't matter that he was ever in pain and in agony. The whole thing just degenerates into utter meaninglessness and insignificance. I don't mean to suggest that the torture didn't do a bad thing to this person, but ultimately it doesn't matter. It all ends up the same.
Yes, but it all ending up the same isn't the same thing as, and so it doesn't matter what happens until we get there. And when I say, and it matters what the path is before we get to the end point, I don't merely mean subjectively it matters, it appears to matter, it matters to them, but it doesn't really matter.
Well, and that's what it seems to me. It just matters subjectively.
But again, I just want to say, I don't understand how we get from, if it doesn't objectively matter to the universe or doesn't objectively matter on a cosmic scale, how do we get from that to so it doesn't objectively matter at all?
Well, remember...
So it's not a point about the nature of objective. It's the question is, why should we think objective value must be on the cosmic scale or not there at all?
Now let's remember the argument. This concern arose in the third point about moral accountability. This wasn't in the first 2 points about objective moral values and duties. What I said was, with regard to the third point, even if objective moral values and duties exist, they become irrelevant because they're inconsequential. So my third point about moral accountability was simply to say, on atheism, even if there are objective right and wrong and good and evil, there's no moral accountability, and so one might as well just live as he pleases. And
might as well. If by might as well means there's no reason to live one way versus the other, unless it makes a difference on the cosmic scale, it just seems to me that the same questions being, to my ears, begged yet again. It matters perfectly. There's an objective, categorical reason, not a matter of opinion. There's a fact of the matter about the compelling, overriding reason that you are irrational to disregard, even though, in terms of the heat death of the universe, it won't stop it. But for all that, there's an objective reason not to behave this way.
That would be to say you have an objective moral duty. And for the third point, I was willing to grant that. But the question here is the deeper question about why adopt the moral point of view. And that can't be a moral answer because you're asking the question, why adopt the moral point of view? I think the concern that I have in this third point is that on
What's the answer that you believe you get as a theist?
Let me explain. I think on the third point that what I'm trying to say there is that on atheism or naturalism, the prudential value and moral value are on a collision course with each other. That what it's prudent for me to do is often in contrast or in conflict with what's moral for me to do. And prudence would seem to trump morality in terms of one's self-interest in virtue of the fact that it makes no difference how you choose. But on theism, where there is moral accountability, you can consistently make choices that go against your self-interest and sacrifice self-interest and prudence for the sake of the moral value and moral duty.
Because precisely you'll get it back in the end. And so it's not really, in the long term, a self-sacrifice at all. That's the thought, yes?
Well, that wasn't what that wouldn't be the way I'd put it. It's not that...
But that is the reason that you think you can resolve the conflict between prudence and and morality, because God makes it be the case that unless you act morally, so your self-interest won't actually be furthered. That's how the solution is.
Yes, that's right. That they'll be in harmony with each other ultimately.
So you're completely right. I don't believe they're in harmony.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I believe the only rational thing to do is to act prudently. On the contrary, I believe there's greater reason. This should be a form of a question, like Jeopardy. Put this in a form of question, Shelly. Yeah. Why not believe that moral reasons outweigh prudential reasons? The mere fact that there's a conflict doesn't commit the naturalist to the claim that the prudential ones are the weightier ones.
all right, but there is that conflict, and for many people, I think, as I said, this can have a demoralizing effect upon a person.
But what do you do when that conflict, for example, people who follow the morality and ethics of martyrdom and believing in the Bible, the tomorrow doesn't matter. I have eternity to spend in heaven, and so now they're ethically driven by these kind of ideals that, hey, I have all eternity, and on a cosmic level, my behavior's here by death by cop or going and doing something that may not be, in the now, the smartest, wisest thing for my family and harming people that are close to me or whatever. But in the long run, it'll pay itself off, and God and the cosmic justice of his righteousness will reward me or punish those who are bad in this act.
Because ultimately his moral choices make no difference either for himself or for the good of the universe. And I suspect that this will be demoralizing in the way that Adams suggested it would.
No doubt for some people it will be, but of course for some people there's a different kind of demoralizing that takes place with the belief in theism, isn't there? I mean, if we're just going to talk about what are some possible psychological effects, some people will act morally not out of the recognition of the objective values, but merely in hopes of getting into heaven and avoiding hell. There's something morally off about that as well. And
I agree.
So both sides face certain empirical questions about, certain people may misread the implications of the view.
Yep.
That strikes me as a standoff at best.
And I mean, you might could point to some early church leaders that became saints, and their kinds of behaviors that make you question, these are the head honchos of the whole Christian movement that are behaving in such a manner that are morally, ethically, questionable.
I don't know. I'm not sure that the person who acts in self-interest has misread the implications of the atheistic worldview.
That's because you've yet again assumed that if we're naturalists, we must assume that prudence, either there are no moral reasons at all, or if there are, they're inferior in strength to prudential reasons. That doesn't seem to me to follow from naturalism at all. If we had more time, obviously we can only begin to scratch the surface of this debate. If we had more time, I'd lay upon you my elaborate theory of the nature of practical reasoning, according to which prudential reasons are less significant than moral reasons. This is a view that I think is completely compatible with naturalism.
And I hate cutting this guy off because this is getting into the juicy parts. But what Kagan is saying here is what is right in front of us to do and behave is less concerning than the universe is going to expand in energy to nothingness, or the sun is going to melt the earth at some point in the distant future, even though those are interesting facts that we can know that are going to happen eventually, likely. They're insignificant on the grand scale of what is happening here and right now.
Naturalism. We can get it. Little imaginary dictator, I suppose, has acted wrongly and as such deserves punishment. So how can we justify the punishment? In terms of the rules of the social contract. What do we do? We agree in the contract that if people break the contract, they'll be subject to penalty.
What if he doesn't want to sign the contract?
So look,
he's outside the contract, so he's not bound by it.
Well, the question is not what does any given person in fact agree to. That's why I talked about what we would agree to insofar as we're imagining ourselves as being perfectly rational. As a perfectly rational being, that is to say, if you imagined a kind of souped up, cleaned up version of the dictator, it would be just as reasonable for him to sign the contract as for the rest of us. It's neither here nor there that he doesn't accept morality. He's still bound by it. We're all bound by it precisely because it would be reasonable for all of us to agree to its terms.
Dr. Kagan, you say that human reason leads to morality.
Dr. Craig.
Dr. Craig, sorry. Wrong pile. Okay, I got myself confused. Okay. Dr. Craig, do you think that without God, there is no free will?
Yes, I guess I would say that, because it would seem to me that if God doesn't exist, then human beings are just material objects, and that what we call free choices are just the results of electrochemical reactions in our nervous system, and that therefore they're not genuinely free. So that was why I said one of the implications of naturalism is physicalism, and as a result determinism. And this seems to me to be just a clear reason for thinking that our moral choices are ultimately illusory and insignificant, because they're like having a toothache, or like having hair grow. There is no sense in which a personal agent freely chooses between A and not A and making a moral decision. So I guess I would say that.
Shelly, it seems like there are a lot of people are hung up on the Nazis.
Yeah. They're bad. They're objectively bad. Let's be clear about that.
But it's hard for them to, it seems like, just based on the questions, it's hard for people to understand how we can objectively say they're bad when, if they won, would they still be bad? If they were the ones kind of running the world and dictating morality, would they still be objectively bad in your view?
Yes, the suggestion is not that it's a matter of a popularity poll or who wins the Second World War or which way history goes. It's a thought experiment. The social contract is a thought experiment, and you ask yourself, what are reasonable terms to govern our behaviors with one another? And in trying to set up that thought experiment, you want to set certain background conditions. One background condition I mentioned was the veil of ignorance. You want to make sure you don't know whether you're one of the people who are, in fact, the winners in society or the losers in society. One of the conditions is you want to imagine the bargainers are rational, because you don't want the rules that emerge to be an artifact of some mistake in reasoning. It's neither here nor there what the Nazis thought was acceptable. The question is just what, in fact, would be the terms of a contract agreed upon by perfectly rational bargainers. And the terms of those contracts, I think if we had more time, we could proceed to lay out the argument, are such that there'd be a prohibition against killing innocent people, which, of course, exactly what the Nazis did. So what the Nazis did was violate the terms of the contract. And so, in fact, they were immoral whether or not they see it.
Dr. Craig, there seems to be an issue with this idea of objective good, that there have been numerous crimes in the history of humanity perpetrated on, in the name of religion.
Right.
Right. How do you grapple with that issue?
I'd like to use religious examples of atrocities to help communicate to students the difference between objective good and objective evil. If you say that there is no objective moral value or moral duties, then you have to say things like this, that the Spanish Inquisition, which sent thousands of Jews to their deaths, was really morally indifferent, that the Crusades, which enlisted children to send off to war and then were ultimately sold into slavery, was a morally indifferent act, that religious intolerance is morally fine. So I think that these examples help to underscore the fact that there really are objective moral values and duties that we recognize when we think about these kinds of situations. So remember, the argument isn't that you have to believe in God in order to be moral. That's not the argument. The argument is that you need to have God as an objective, transcendent standard for moral value that moves beyond simple human conventions or societal mores.
But why do we stray so much? Why do these things happen so often in the name of God?
Right. If you would ask me that as a Christian philosopher, I would begin to talk about Christian doctrine of sin, that we're morally fallen persons, that we're corrupted, and therefore in desperate need of God's moral cleansing and forgiveness and rehabilitation in our lives. And that these moral issues bring to the fore our desperate need of God as a moral moral healer and forgiver.
And Dr.
Think about what they're like, how we've evolved to a point where we've created systems of religion that have allowed us to think in these ways that are almost like, they share the same ethical outlook. It looks like Craig and Kagan would agree, I imagine, for the most part, on many of the morals that, are good or bad. But how a religious system can literally become so infused in one's mind that they actually go to believe these things about themselves in a spiritual sense. And it's like, if religion has gotten so good at hijacking those things, it's just a mind-boggling thing for me to think about why religion helps so many take the shortcuts from the educated, sophisticated, potentially actual case from science that seems like Kagan, or at least the philosophy and taking a scientific approach that Kagan is presenting. Would most people be able to wrap their minds around what Kagan is presenting, or do most people need the 3-year-old version, simple, God said, and don't do, and you're a good person, easier way of absorbing morality, laws, and stuff that helps them navigate the world? And it's more naive, but it's still more significant. Even if there isn't a granddaddy in the sky, believe there is anyway. It'll help you to be a more moral person in many people's minds. Someone like Christopher Hitchens will say, no, it's robbing you of being the moral agent behind these things, instead of Big Brother telling you you are doing it because you're an ethical person, you're a good person. Anyway.
Kagan, why do we violate the social contract so much, whether it's on Wall Street or whether it's in Nazi Germany?
I would talk about sin as well. I mean, the vocabulary of sin, though it finds its natural home in religion, isn't limited. I mean, we need a vocabulary to talk about. We need to face the fact that people are not perfectly moral. And it's no doubt some deep truth about our nature that we fail to live up to our moral obligations.
This is the same problem we saw with Jordan Peterson when Sam was using the word, or agreeing to just go along with the term hell. What he meant was the worst possible kind of hypothetical suffering. And then Jordan's like, oh, you mean hell? And all the religious people go, yeah, you believe in hell, Sam? And he's like, that's not what I mean. And anyway, you need to have at least some common definitions you can use. Sin is easier when you're talking to religious people to say bad things, bad behaviors, people who've done bad or are inherently doing wickedness. And what does that mean? Well, you can break that down in a Kagan way. You still use their terms, but he doesn't mean the same stain of some kind of cosmic stain that we somehow at one point our ancestors did something wrong and we inherently carry it because of a bad thing we did at the beginning of time.
You can...
Or, to Stillman Craig's view, at the beginning of when God finally places his spirit inside of Homo sapiens, which along the evolutionary line did that at some time in Craig's view.
Put this fact in some metaphysical terms in terms of original sin. You can put this fact in naturalistic terms, in terms of something about our evolutionary heritage and how we were evolved to favor our kin and our friends. There's got to be some explanation of it. Anybody who pretends that everything is well with the world is naive. The claim that there's objective morality is not, and that perfectly rational beings would agree to its terms and thereby ground from the basis of objective reality, is not any kind of claim that we are perfectly rational, that we behave perfectly rationally. In trivial terms, this is a completely familiar fact. You're on a diet, and the piece of chocolate cake calls you from the refrigerator, right? So you know you shouldn't do it. You do it anyway. That's what people are like. Interesting question why that's so, but I take it there's no disagreement at all that it's so. And the naturalist, I think, is no more at a handicap in terms of offering explanations of that fact.
What about ways of preventing it? Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, are there ways of controlling? It's sort of instilling the social contract a little bit better.
Well, look, there are a variety of things that people need in order to become moral beings. One is moral education, a topic of tremendous significance, though, again, other than just gesturing its direction, it would take us way too long to say anything helpful about it. How children are brought up so as to have a regard for one another and to recognize that it isn't just a matter of whether you get caught. It isn't just a matter of whether you're going to get punished, but that this is another human being you're dealing with, and as such, you have to have respect for their interests. Moral education is crucially important. Moral community is crucially important. And not to be naive at all, the state is crucially important. I mean, there's certainly one thing that Craig's theism provides him that I lack. He has a cosmic enforcer, which provides a kind of motivation that I can't appeal to. So I've got to hope I can assemble materials here on Earth. Although I can't resist taking one little, I'm not sure it's a pot shot, but at least it's a question about the accountability, which I take it as the thought that evildoers get punished and good doers get a heavenly reward, and so you don't get the bad guys getting into heaven. I'm not quite sure how to reconcile that with the belief that Jesus can provide, salvation. Yeah. It seems to me that is in tension with the notion of accountability we're trying to put forward.
Yeah, actually, this gets into really important questions of theology, because on the Christian view, it isn't the bad guys that go to hell. The bad guys get into heaven. The bad guys are the ones who recognize their sin, who turn to God in contrition and repentance and say, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. It's the self-righteous Pharisees who wind up in hell because they fancy they're so good they don't need God's forgiveness and cleansing. So on the Christian view,
isn't that kind of sad? Imagine, now they painted a hell of a damn narrative, didn't they, in the Gospels, but imagine if the Pharisees were absolutely good people. They abided by laws, they were really kind and good people. Maybe they did a few things bad, but they weren't self-aware of it or weren't made aware of it. Yet they're burning in hell. But everyone who could behave however, as long as they accept Jesus into their heart as Lord and Savior, boom, they get to go to heaven. Wow.
Christ actually is the one who bears the penalty and the payment for sin. The wrath of God from God's holy justice is poured out upon Christ so that I don't have to pay the penalty for my sins that I deserve, and I can be a beneficiary of His grace.
But that does seem that in tension with the notion of accountability that you were laying forward, where the thought was, unless my doing good has cosmic significance, it turns out that I can do evil, and as long as I manage to recognize the saving power of Jesus, in time, this accountability stuff's not really there.
Yeah, how many deathbed confessions or conversions have happened in history?
Well, no genuine Christian would think like that. What I was trying to communicate there.
Yo, that is funny as hell. No genuine Christian.
What I was trying to communicate there is that our moral lives really matter, that they make a difference. For me, the thought that everything perishes in the heat death of the universe, like Russell's credo, is so depressing, so awful that it just seems to put a question mark behind everything we do. All our accomplishments, all our deeds just seem so trivial in light of this cosmic doom that awaits us all.
But not for me.
Yeah.
It seems to me. It seems to me that
I just don't understand.
If I've saved somebody's life, I've done something significant. I've done something important. I've done something whose significance is not in any way threatened, diminished, reduced one iota by the fact that whatever it is, 40 billion years from now, the sun will explode. It's neither here nor there. I've saved a human life. That's what matters. And the fact it doesn't have cosmic significance doesn't seem to me to undermine its significance.
I'd like to talk about animals.
Animals?
Yes. What about our relationship with animals? Do we have a moral obligation to treat animals well, or are they just totally separate from us in the grand scheme of things?
Is that a question for me?
Or for both of you? You want to go first?
Yeah. Well, I think that here, the Christian, the theist, has a tremendous advantage in terms of developing an environmental ethic and an ethic for the stewardship and care of animals. And it would be based not upon the fact that animals themselves are moral agents who have rights, because, as we've said, not being rational beings, they aren't moral agents. So it's not as though the antelope has the right to live or something of that sort, but rather, on a Christian view, God has given us stewardship of this beautiful planet to care for it and not to pollute it and ravage it and destroy it. And so I think we have responsibilities toward the animals that would involve not just slaughtering them aimlessly, polluting the seas and destroying their environments and so forth, but that we would be like gardeners, in a sense, tending a garden in which there are not only vegetable life, but also there would be animal life as well. So I would see this as rooted in the divine responsibilities and mandates given to us to be good stewards of the earth.
Are you a vegetarian?
No, I'm not.
Yeah. So our stewardship towards animals only goes so far.
Right.
We can eat them. We can chop them up and wear them.
Yes. But that would be done in ways that would be, I think, compatible with certain kinds of rules.
No. So I'm not sure you get the advantage, as you put it, in that case. So,
dude, this is, I think, an Achilles heel. The whole animal issue is just really, really rough.
Naturalists, much in the naturalists say in the struggle for survival of the fittest, how is there any kind of ethic toward behavior toward animals?
my view wasn't survival of the fittest. My view was that what morality boils down to is don't harm and do help. And now the question is, can creatures like chickens and cows be harmed? And the answer is, of course they can. Consequently, I think it's immoral to harm them. And that seems to me to provide a very strong moral reason to be a vegetarian, to not wear leather and the like. So I certainly will concede that your view allows for a space for a certain kind of limited responsibility towards the animals. But I beg to differ with the claim that you've got a better handle on that situation than I do. It seems to me that our treatment of animals is morally appalling. It's morally completely unacceptable, and that we ought to radically revise the way we live precisely because they feel pain, they can be hurt, and we're constantly hurting these creatures.
Oh, this is definitely the Achilles heel, I think, to what Craig just said. What do you think?
Let's talk about the difference between various societies. How do we explain differences in culture, the treatment of women, the treatment of different races, gender, sexualities in various societies, if there is a single God with a single morality, or if there is a social contract standard?
Now, here I don't think there would be any significant difference between us in the sense that this is a question about moral epistemology, that is to say how we come to a knowledge of the good and the right, rather than a question of moral ontology, which is a question about the objective reality of the good and the right. And I think we would both agree that the objective existence of moral values and duties doesn't imply that these are always easy to grasp, or that people infallibly do grasp them, given our human proclivity to selfishness.
So certain societies haven't caught up?
Yeah, I have absolutely no qualms about being politically incorrect and saying that certain societies like National Socialist Germany were morally corrupt. Or Afrikaner South Africa, or...
what about Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, in its treatment of women, I think...
What about be silent? You know, the woman is to be silent, wear her head covering, so that the archons don't spy out and try to come down and take advantage of them.
It's appalling. I think that once you have a transcendent moral standard,
silent in the church, of course, but like a woman should not be suffered to teach and things like this.
Transcends culture and society, you're in a position to make the kind of judgments that the court did at Nuremberg in saying that these Nazi leaders were war criminals and were justly condemned for what they did. If you lack that transcendent standard, then I think you are faced with the problem of sociocultural relativism.
Well, as Craig says, this is, I think, actually a point in which we are in large agreement. I might not use the word transcendent here, but I think I agree otherwise with virtually everything he said. So if the question is, what's the explanation of the fact that so many societies have had morally appalling moral codes? The answer, in part, is it takes a while for civilization to work its way up to recognize moral truth, just as it takes a while for civilization to work its way up to recognize truths in any other domain. So I believe in evolution. I believe for familiar, I was making a remark like this over dinner, that for familiar evolutionary reasons, we were built to think the world moved along roughly Aristotelian lines with regard to physics. It's bad physics, but it's understandable why evolution would select us to think that something like Aristotelian physics was so. Happily, evolution also implanted in us reasoning capacity to step back from the beliefs that it gave us at the ground level and to challenge them and to test them. And so we've worked our way up from Aristotelian physics. And similarly, it takes centuries to work our way up to the point at which we recognize that all people are equal. It takes centuries until we work our way up to the point at which we recognize that women count as much as men, blacks count as much as whites, and that animals count too.
Very nice. We'd like you to give some closing statements, just a few words.
Wow.
To this case.
Who's going to go first?
Who goes first?
Who went first?
I went first.
Why don't you go first?
Okay. I didn't prepare a closing statement, so this is just, I'm going to just wing it. I've argued tonight that if God exists, then you do have an objective basis for moral values, moral duties, and moral accountability. And I don't think that that's ever been disputed tonight. The debate has been more about whether naturalism can give you these things. But we haven't really contested that if God exists, then you will have a sound foundation for morality. God's own holy and just nature will be the good and will define the good as all things relate to it.
If both models can work and it doesn't falsify one or the other technically, then I think that a lot of what Craig does is acts like there's no way in which you can actually ground any of these ethics without a God. And it's like, nah, dude did a good job. Other guy, Kagan, did a good job.
His commandments to love him and to love our neighbor as ourselves will furnish grounds for our moral duties and obligations that will be objective and transcultural. And then our lives will have a paramount significance because the moral choices we make really do make a difference. They have eternal consequences. So I think theism is tremendously attractive and would invite you to consider it for yourselves. By contrast, on naturalism, it's hard to see why these creatures we call Homo sapiens have intrinsic moral value, that this moral contrast.
The way he uses words, like when he talks about humans, he like goes to the whole, these creatures we call Homo sapiens. He uses like very not favorable language when he's describing in scientific terms, humans and stuff. So he uses verbiage that mitigate or like downplays the significance of the agency and our experience as humans, and only gives positive, favorable verbiage when he uses his religious background to try and describe these things.
Seems to me to be just a fiction and not really anything more than a social convention that Homo sapiens conspire among themselves to fancy themselves valuable. And this is especially evident, I think, on materialism and determinism, where, as I say, making a moral decision is no different than a tree growing a branch. It's hard to see how a puppet and its movements can have moral significance. In terms of moral duties, again, without someone to prohibit something or to command something, it's very hard to see how things can be prohibited or commanded. That's very different than the law of contradiction, I think, because the law of contradiction doesn't prescribe behavior. It doesn't say to you, don't contradict yourself. You're free to do that if you want to. It just says if you do so, you're irrational.
Dude, we've had thousands and thousands of years within written history where infanticide or patricide or matricide, or some sibling kills the other sibling for power, for reason, for women, for whatever, to kind of figure out, that's not good. And these are stories outside of the Bible. Every culture has noticed this, and it leaves a stain. They never see them in a good light when they do these kinds of things. So come on. It's just silly to me.
But the moral duties are giving you prescriptions for behavior, for ways you ought to behave. And it seems to me on atheism that they're just like rules of etiquette. And then finally, moral accountability. I've already talked about that it's hard to see why we should always adopt the moral point of view rather than just act in our own self-interest on atheism, since it really doesn't make any difference in the long run. So I would just invite you.
In the long run. Always in the long run.
Students to think deeply about whether or not theism isn't a better foundation for building your own moral life and a career that lies ahead of you.
Well, let me start on a note of agreement. I would want to invite all of you to think as well. I don't think the issues that we've been talking about this evening are at all easy or simple. I suppose it's probably obvious that we haven't settled anything here, but in it's important to also point out that we've only begun to address any number of relevant issues. This is not the kind of topic that you can do justice to in an hour and a half. At best, it can whet your appetite for learning more. So on the one hand, I want to encourage all of you who haven't taken a class in moral philosophy to take a class in moral philosophy and see how some of the great minds through history of Western civilization have dealt with some of these issues. And similarly, I would encourage all of you, theists or not, to take classes in religion. I hope I've said nothing this evening to suggest any kind of hostility to religion. Far from it. I think it's a view worth taking very, very seriously. Though I happen to believe that theistic beliefs don't play any essential role in grounding morality. Now, I sketched a view according to which there is morality, it's an objective fact in as robust a sense as it seems to me one might like. That morality is real and genuine, and I tried to lay out at least the rough outline of how that view might go. It seems to me that one essential point of disagreement between Craig and me is something that I asked about several times. It's this move, what to my mind is the move from the thought that without theism, then our actions don't have eternal cosmic significance, to the conclusion that, therefore, without theism, our actions don't have significance, objective moral significance. That just seems to me to be a mistake. It seems to me that if I love somebody, the reality of that loving relationship is valuable, of real value, of genuine, objective value, and it's not in any way threatened by the fact that I will die, my wife will die, my children will die, and eventually the universe will come to an end. The fact that billions and billions of years from now it's all going to be the same doesn't mean it's all the same now. I certainly want to concede that if you're looking for this kind of cosmic significance, atheism is not going to provide it for you. But that wasn't the subject of tonight's debate. The subject of tonight's debate was whether you needed that kind of cosmic significance to have morality. And on that issue, I'm quite confident the answer is no. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Damn! Look, that was great. I loved learning so much. This is the first time I've ever watched this, and of course I'm reacting to you raw. If you enjoy these videos, please subscribe to the channel. Check that box so you get notified. These are a few long ones I've done. Some of them are shorter and more fun and stuff, but this was a very deep, complex thing. I think Kagan did have the upper hand here at the end of the day. He provided good foundation to point out morality is there without needing the cosmic man in the sky in order to make that the case. Though I do think that Craig did perform well in this as well. So, I mean, he typically does. He's great at debating, but I really was glad to hear someone from the atheistic kind of perspective bring in a moral case on why morality matters right now without needing to look down into eternity to make sense of it. Anywho, subscribe, like the video, comment down below what your favorite part. Did you learn something new? Did you already know this? What am I missing? And share it out there. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, see you then.